Today I watched something so mind-numbingly tedious and irritating it was hard to come to terms with it being billed as an interview. Early this morning on ITV's Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid, Tommy Robinson, former founder and leader of the English Defence League, who is now part of Rebel Media, although that was never mentioned, was invited on as a guest. I must have forgotten the definition for guest, because if I treated a guest coming to my house like Piers Morgan did to Tommy Robinson, the very least I'd expect to get would be a tap on the nose for being so rude. And when I say tap, I mean punched. The interview came about because of a tweet that Tommy released soon after the attack on some Muslims near Finsbury Park Mosque with a rental van from Wales. In it he said, "The mosque where the attack happened tonight has a long history of creating terrorists and radical jihadists and promoting hate and segregation." By all accounts, this caused outrage amongst the Twitterati. I can of course think of many things that cause far more outrage than a slightly insensitively timed tweet, but for some people, the truth is outrageous and is always delivered at an insensitive time. So, this ended up with Tommy Robinson appearing on GMB, and for 18 minutes I sat and watched something more torturous than a North Korean hard labour camp. Piers Morgan attempting to interview someone, but clearly forgetting that in an interview there are generally two people involved, not just Piers Morgan. Now, I don't actually dislike Piers a whole lot. Sometimes he says something I can't agree with. Other times I find myself defending him. The last time was when he was doing that stint on American television as a chat show host, and he had some things to say about gun control, and that went down as well as can be expected. Now, I don't necessarily agree with his stance on gun control, but I do believe that he has the right to say what he likes about it, and the American Constitution's First Amendment also says he can, but plenty of people wanted him deported for his views. But back to the interview, if you can call it that, with Tommy Robinson. What I want from an interview is something either informative or thought-provoking. Informative, where I get to learn something I didn't before, or thought-provoking, where the subject of the interview is either someone I like or dislike, and I end up with the opposite opinion of them after the interview is concluded. Because without a carefully crafted set of answers, they either look a fool or they handle themselves with aplomb and garner my respect. But we were never going to get anything close to an approximation of my idea of an interview, because it was clear from the outset that Piers Morgan simply wasn't interested in any answers Tommy Robinson gave and talked over him for pretty much the entire duration. In fact, the closest we got to an interview was the first 2 minutes and 30 seconds when Susanna Reid asked the questions, because she appeared to at least give Robinson a chance to respond. But that was short-lived, because after that 2 minutes and 30 seconds, it was no longer an interview with Tommy Robinson, it became the Piers Morgan show. I'm perplexed why GMB and Piers Morgan bothered to have Tommy Robinson on at all, because if you're not prepared to want to listen to anything he has to say, there's clearly an ulterior motive, and if that motive was to make Piers Morgan look good, well, that didn't work out too well, now did it? Piers Morgan pretty much undid himself within the first 15 seconds of talking, and here is the clip here. It's not going to be a big clip, because for some inexplicable reason, ITV are going on a bit of a purge on YouTube, taking down copies of the entire interview, so to stick with fair use rules, it's going to be a bit of a short one.
Here's my point, right? I've read a lot of stuff that you've said and done. I know your history, right? I know all of it. Good, bad and ugly. Some of it's ugly and some of it I agree with.
Did you hear that? Piers Morgan says he actually agrees with some of what Tommy Robinson has said, but then spends the next 15 minutes making sure Robinson can't get a word in. I find that attitude odd. If you've already accepted that the man you're conversing with has said things that you agree with, it makes no sense whatsoever to deny him the ability to speak when he could very well say yet more things you agree with. Either you want an honest conversation with the man, or you're scared that by agreeing with someone who can be as divisive as he is influential will somehow reflect poorly on yourself, Piers. And the entire interview was like this throughout. Allow Robinson a few words out before yet another question was posed, before anything like an answer was provided for the previous question. It's the interview that never was. But in amongst the barbed comments from Piers Morgan, Mr. Robinson did manage to extract silence from Piers Morgan on more than one occasion, and desperation as he tried to steer away from the questions he got back. When it came to the question of, have you read the Book of Muhammad, Piers initially thought that Robinson was referring to the violence and naturally countered with the obvious similarities to the Bible. But it wasn't until Robinson pushed again, have you read the Book of Muhammad, that Piers finally got what Robinson was referring to and desperately tried to explain the interview formula to Robinson in a bid to change the subject. Because if you're going to take the side of defending Islam, as Piers did, you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that the Quran is quite happy to tell us about Muhammad's marriage to a 6-year-old Aisha and the consummation of that marriage when she was 9 years old. If you're going to defend Islam, Piers, that's just some of the baggage you're saddled with. No wonder you wanted to get Robinson off the subject. But perhaps the best way to divert him off the subject is not to bring up his criminal past when your own history is just as damn shady. The Leveson inquiry into phone hacking had this to say about Piers. Overall, Mr. Morgan's attempt to push back from his own bullish statement to the Press Gazette was utterly unpersuasive, said Leveson in his report on the culture, practices and ethics of the press, published on Thursday. This was not, in any sense at all, a convincing answer. Leveson was also critical of Morgan's attitude to phone hacking. This evidence does not establish that Mr. Morgan authorised the hacking of voicemails or that journalists employed by the Mirror Group were indulging in this practice, said Leveson. What it does, however, clearly prove is that he was aware that it was taking place in the press as a whole, and that he was sufficiently unembarrassed by what was criminal behaviour that he was prepared to joke about it. The short answer? You're a fucking liar, Piers. But then, before the end of the interview, Robinson got to land some blows. When he made the distinction between Islam being an idea and Muslims being people, Piers argued that it was a faith. But watch the clip for yourselves, because again, a touch of silence from Piers, because once he hears the word Scientology, nothing.
From Islam.
Right.
Okay?
But what you don't do...
differentiate Muslims
Muslims
from
are people. Islam is an idea.
Yeah.
Islam's an idea. A bad idea.
Islam is a faith.
Follow
no, it's an idea.
It's a faith.
It's an idea that you can change your mind.
No, it's a faith. Like Christianity.
Like Scientology.
Like all faiths.
Like
it's a religion, it's a faith.
Like Scientology?
So, Tommy, if you accept...
It's an ideology.
If you're saying that the problem is...
Now, some may be wondering, why the fixation with Scientology? Well, Piers Morgan seems to have a real issue with them. Really doesn't like them at all, describes them as a cult and a bunch of weirdos. Now, I personally don't treat Scientology any different to Catholicism, Christianity, Buddhism or Islam. I think they're all delusions, and I don't see Scientology as any more or less of a delusion than any other religion. Though in Scientology's favour, I'm not aware of any cover-ups where paedophile priests get to interfere with children and instead of being prosecuted, simply get transferred away to another church to escape punishment. But the reason why all of this is important, and I don't know whether or not Robinson planned the trap, but soon after in the interview, Piers does something remarkable, and it's probably best I simply show you the man's staggering hypocrisy. It's a very, very interesting clip.
If I hold this book up and say, there will never be peace on this earth so long as we have this book, it's a violent and cursed book. That's
wrong.
Can I tell you who said that? Can I tell you who said that?
Can you put the
Sir William Gladstone
Right, you
said
wouldn't
that.
do that with...
Sir William Gladstone
Would you do that with
said
the Bible? Show some respect.
Show some respect.
Show some respect.
Have you read this book?
For people...
Have you read this book?
There are over a billion people...
There are 100 verses in this book that incite violence and murder against us.
Show some damn respect for people's religious beliefs, right?
I should show some respect for a book that incites murder against me.
Put it down.
And calls me an animal. No, I won't put it down. Sir William Gladstone held this book above his head in Parliament and he said there will never be peace on this earth so long as we have this book. It's a violent and cursed book. Was Sir William Gladstone, who we have statues across our capital C, was he a bigot or an Islamophobe?
See, now
Winston
you're
Churchill...
sounding like a complete lunatic.
No, I'm quoting previous some of the best leaders in this country.
You're sounding like a bigoted lunatic.
No, I'm not.
Somebody that basically,
Winston Churchill
you
said,
are an
Winston
Islamophobe
Churchill,
who hates Islam.
No, I don't
You
hate
basically
Islam.
think all
I know-
Muslims are to blame.
No.
We've seen you on video saying it. And
I
what
haven't.
you're doing now is deliberately inflammatory. It is deliberately poisonous.
How's this inflammatory?
And you are having
I'm
the
just giving you
complete
facts.
opposite effect to the one that you say
I'm
you
quoting
have.
William Gladstone.
You are stirring
I'm
up
quoting
hatred. You
stirring
are
up hatred.
abusing people's religion. You're abusing their faith. And you're being a complete disgrace.
What do you know about the Prophet Muhammad? We've established nothing. You are ignorant.
I know
to
that
this
you're
issue.
deliberately insulting
What do you know
people
about the Prophet?
who
How
have-
am I insulting people?
Who have deeply held religious beliefs.
And if
and you flouncing
this
the
book-
Quran around in your
this
hand
book is
in
the
that
reason,
disgraceful manner
this book
is outrageous.
This book is the reason we're in.
And there is where Piers Morgan's vaguely cool exterior melts away for all to see. Firstly, he demands respect for the Quran and its adherents, but doesn't give the same respect to Scientology, which is also classed as a faith religion, the same as Islam is. Secondly, Piers Morgan has lost sight of what respect actually entails. No book gets automatic respect simply because over 1 billion people think it's great and good. Why does Piers Morgan think religion is exempt from contempt or questions? The Quran is a fundamental pillar of Islam, and there are big problems with the book, as there are big problems with the Bible. But when you can't honestly debate the Muhammad and Aisha problem, you've already rendered any contribution to the conversation as irrelevant. The fact is, the very things that Tommy Robinson claims that are in the Quran are there in the Quran. He doesn't need to lie about them. Piers Morgan, as a fucking journalist, can do the bare minimum of research by reading the book and coming to the same conclusions. And you know who else would agree with Tommy Robinson? Fundamentalist Muslims that are happy to read these verses, take them to heart, and then go and blow themselves up because of it. They see it as their duty and calling to dispense with as many infidels as they possibly can. Nothing Robinson said was bigoted. How can it be? He's repeating what's in the fucking book. It's obvious to me that Piers Morgan doesn't agree with Tommy Robinson in anything like a meaningful way, because if he did, he'd find little to fault, and certainly wouldn't ignore the obvious problems that Islam has, and certainly wouldn't make excuses up for them. I would have had more respect for Piers if he had said, actually, I didn't know that, and if that's true, then that is not something I can agree with, but instead chose to denounce the messenger as a bigot and Islamophobic. Islamophobia is a bit like Piers Morgan's interview abilities, non-existent and a rubbish excuse. Please like, dislike if you really want to, make a comment, don't make a comment, but I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. It makes all this stuff kind of worthwhile. Bye now.